What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode. And this week, it's going to be of particular interest to anyone out there who is trying to raise a mortgage. Now, I'd say that applies to the vast majority of people who are out there looking at property and listening to this podcast. So this is going to be a really interesting episode. Those of you who are interested in raising a mortgage, there's a whole lot of preparation work that you need to do. I'm going to discuss all of that with my guest this week. My guest is Mags Barrett, also known as Margaret Barrett, if you're looking for her in LinkedIn or any of that. But my guest this week is Mags, and she is the head of Mortgage Navigators.ie, which is a mortgage provider, not a provider, but a broker. And we're going to have a great old conversation about the process of getting a mortgage and how they can help and the specialisms that they have and various things like that. But I think the tips and suggestions and things like that are going to be super helpful for all of you guys that are in the process of thinking about buying a property, building up to, saving your deposit and stuff like that. There's a little bit more work than just having the deposit. There's actually getting mortgage ready before you even seek for the approval. And so all of that stuff we're going to cover with Mags. So guys, without further ado, my discussion with Mags Barrett. Mags Barrett, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Gavin.
It's great to have you here and in person, one of the few people who actually comes into my office. And so let's begin with what it is you do and how long have you been doing it?
Brilliant. So Mortgage Navigators is a mortgage brokerage for all customers, first-time buyers, movers, switchers and investment properties. We're a new mortgage brokerage to the Irish market. We're coming up to our first year anniversary in October, so we're fairly new. My background is from banking. I'm ex-Bank of Ireland for a number of years in Bank of Ireland, leading out in mortgages, and Contracting Plus is our parent company. And Contracting Plus is an accountancy and payroll company for professional contractors. And that cohort of customers has a very, very difficult mortgage journey. And Contracting Plus was a customer of mine in Bank of Ireland. And they asked me, would I open up their mortgage department, which I did. Took me a little bit to take the jump because I was having a really good career in Bank of Ireland, but took the jump and haven't looked back. So I suppose since we've come to market, we have worked with the Irish lenders to maybe ease that mortgage journey for especially that cohort of customers throughout Ireland. So we have offices in Cork and Dublin, and obviously it's an online tool, so we're nationwide.
That's brilliant. I can actually see why it would be difficult, and we'll get into that customer journey now in a little bit. But why don't we take, for the purpose of just a bit of context, take us back. And you started in Bank of Ireland, presumably. Have you been there since you kind of started your career?
No.
Okay, tell us.
Yeah, so I've had a very checkered career, if you want to talk like that. So I left college. My first job actually was in the timber industry. Worked with a company called OSB Group. Went in there for a summer job, actual first proper job that paid a weekly wage, and they asked me to stay on as they opened a greenfield manufacturing plant for veneering products. So spent over 5 years at it was actually called NDV, Northside Doors and Veneers, still going. So I went from greenfield to exporting into the UK and Northern Ireland. And then a job came up in a town close to my hometown in the motor industry as a business and marketing person. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go for it, and went for it, and spent 11 and a half years with Newmarket Motors.
Oh, wow.
And had a fantastic career with Newmarket Motors. Got married there, had my 3 babies there, complete life cycle with Newmarket Motors. And then, the kids were that bit older, and I often call Bank of Ireland my midlife crisis. Right. But I suppose took a step back and said, am I going to stick with the motor industry for the rest of my life, or am I going to go further? So I suppose looked at my skills that I had and chose banking. Later life, I was 35, so later life joining Bank of Ireland, and joined actually in a very junior position when I entered, and had a fantastic career. You know what I mean? I had a number of years in Bank of Ireland and went from customer advisor position to mortgage advisor to mortgage manager.
When did that move take place? Because obviously we went through the crash and everything like that.
That was it. So I suppose I worked in the motor industry when it was boom. You know what I mean? Yeah. Newmarket Motors at the time were one of the leading Audi dealers in Ireland, based in North Cork, which was, funny in itself, but it was. So like we were selling Audi Q7s like there was no tomorrow, like back in 2005, 2006.
The good old days, yeah.
The good old days. And I was the finance manager there, so I was getting fine, hefty commission checks at the end of every month. Went out on maternity leave in 2008, came back in 2009. And let's just say that commission check went from
shriveled.
Oh Lord God, unbelievable! Yeah, couldn't believe it. And you know, it was funny. My first boy was born in October 2008, and we bought the Examiner the day of his birth, and the big headline was recession. You know, so I was like, but we didn't know what it meant.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, I'm an 80s child, so I grew up in a recession. But by God, did I figure out what a recession was when I returned to the motor industry. And we weathered that storm, you know what I mean? We weathered that storm. You know, we had a very, very loyal customer base back in Newmarket Motors, and they survived, and they're still surviving quite
But they weren't
healthily.
selling as many Q7s. Though.
No, I can tell you, probably. And, you know, the problem was is that you had customers coming back in, trying to trade in their Q7s, and you didn't want to take it as a prize nearly.
Yeah.
You know, so I suppose seeing the boom bust in an industry that really felt it.
Big time.
And you know, didn't feel it in the property market at that time, but it was very, very relevant. And I've always said that, you know, the motor industry is actually the first indicator of something going a little bit wrong. You know what I mean? So
that's exactly what I can remember, because I was watching the market like crazy back, because I had borrowed a lot of money for different projects and stuff like that around 2006-07.
Yeah.
And I can remember looking at news in America and seeing just signs of trouble brewing and hearing about it on a kind of regular basis. And then they started talking about how the car dealerships were feeling it first. And after the car dealerships, then it was the banks and stuff. Yeah. And it was kind of a steady unraveling of the entire economy.
And it absolutely does. It absolutely does. And, you know, when I took the jump to open the brokerage, my first phone call actually was to someone in the motor industry, and my question was, how's the motor industry doing? Because for me, I didn't want to start a mortgage brokerage company if I felt there was going to be a wobble in 2 or 3 years' time in the property game.
That's smart.
But they were flying it, like absolutely flying it. And it's a bit like when we're going to talk about second-hand properties now, their problem was that they didn't have good supply of second-hand cars coming in. So it's the same replica, you know, same product, but into the same customer really. But it is the first, you know, if something is going to take a bit of a downturn, you'll see it there first.
You'll see it there first. Well, it's good that we don't see it coming down the stream at the moment, although affordability has definitely become an issue for a lot of people. And I mean, in terms of let's get into your business, the Mortgage Navigators. I mean, the customers that you're serving so it's contractors and things like that. So it's people that don't have the paycheck that they can rely on a monthly basis that most banks would be looking for. Yeah. And so how do you bridge that? You know, how do you overcome that issue of the fluctuations that people will see in their pay?
So I suppose we deal with all customers, but a good cohort of our customers are that professional contractor, but they're professionals, you know what I mean? So they've been working in a permanent role, high end, you know what I mean, on a good salary, and have decided to go contracting for the simple reason they can get more money. Right. So they're well paid, I suppose, is the thing. So when you touch on affordability, and this is a conversation I have often if I'm meeting, you know, anyone in the property market, affordability, I'm not too sure is the actual problem, because we have hundreds of house hunters on our books that can buy. The problem is that there's no
stock.
Exactly. They're paying as, you know, extortionate rent, so they're affording that 2,400 euros per month when a mortgage repayment might be 1,700. So whilst property prices are going up, property prices have always gone up. You know what I mean? It's our problem is that we just don't have enough supply. But that cohort of customers, I suppose, that professional contractor. When I used to work in Bank of Ireland, and I suppose I was unfamiliar with how to package them, they became a very difficult mortgage application, because were they employed, were they self-employed, how would you present them to the underwriter? So I suppose since Mortgage Navigators has been stood up, we've sat with the lenders, we've educated them, I suppose, and their underwriting department as to what is a professional contractor. And we now have, I suppose, changed or coached credit policies to look favourably on these customers. Right. And we're getting them through with more borrowings, I suppose, maybe than what they would be getting elsewhere. But they're professionals, you know what I mean? They're engineers, they're pharmacists, they're doctors, you know.
So contracting in the sense of they're sort of placements kind of as opposed to the traditional contractor that you might sort of see as a building contractor or something
that's
like
it,
that.
yeah. So we're good at self-employed as well, but I suppose the contractors are someone that has a fixed term contract with a multinational predominantly. Maybe in the pharmaceutical, in the tech, engineering, and we have a lot of, we actually do a lot of construction as well, because we do a lot with the PM group. So PM, so we're getting all sorts of professionals, but they are professionals by their very nature, and they're well-paid professionals. A lot of these contractors are, let's call them new Irish. You know what I mean? That might be over here in a stamp 1 to stamp 4. And that again is something maybe our lenders need to look at a little bit more favourably, because stamp 4 seems to be predominantly the stamp that's accepted. You know what I mean? Whereas
when you talk about that, just for the purpose of people who don't know what stamp 1, stamp 4,
so they're work permits, so work permit visa. So it's giving, I suppose, that particular client
an option,
exactly, authority to work in Ireland. So a lot of our clients would be on a stamp 1G, which would be a critical skills stamp, because they're obviously maybe in pharma or even construction now. We're starting to see some critical skills coming through there, which is
interesting.
Which is a sign of the times maybe, but a lot of our lenders would only take a stamp 4 as credit policy. Some will take a stamp 1G, critical skills.
And is the concern just that they'll up sticks and run?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So they probably have a permit to work in Ireland maybe 1 year or 2 year, but you can apply for your stamp 4 if you're here for 4 or 5 years.
Right, okay. So there's a lot of nuance to it, isn't there?
There is. Yeah, there is.
And what about the more traditional sort of borrower that just comes in and says, "Can you help us get a mortgage?" Like, you deal with anyone.
Absolutely, and I suppose they're the bread and butter of our business, really. So let's say, for argument's sake, the first time buyer. That's now 80% of the market in the June figures. That customer, I think, sometimes can come into us a little bit too late in their journey. As in, I've seen a house, I want to buy it, and they're not mortgage ready. So the advice really, Gavin, is be prepared. The mortgage process actually is a box ticking exercise. You know what I mean? It's a process, and there's certain amounts of criteria that you have to pass.
Let's use that first example. First time buyer who wants to buy a property. How do they get mortgage ready? In terms of, like, what advice would you give? When should they begin the process? If they want to buy a property, say 6 months from now, is that a good time?
Absolutely. Because the banks look back 6 months. Right. Okay. So it's a 6 months assessment actually. So anything, if there's something wrong in your finances preceding that 6 months, you've time to correct it. I suppose is the thing. And we offer a free assessment call. Our journey is actually free from start to finish with Mortgage Navigators. But the first thing we're looking for, obviously everybody knows the Central Bank of Ireland rules. So it's loan to value 90%, so you can borrow up to 90% of the purchase price. Loan to income for a first time buyer is 4 times, for a mover it's 3.5. So everyone knows those, right?
The rules,
What they don't, or what they sometimes forget, is that you have to prove the mortgage repayment over the previous 6 months to application.
Right.
And not joking, 99% of declines is going to be on that proven repayment ability.
Interesting.
And it's easy to pass because
you just have to behave yourself for 6 months.
You do. And sometimes there's a little bit of coaching on bank statements. So if by coming to us really early on, we'll review your bank statements over 6 months and we're going to say, look, it's either there or it's not. If it's there, brilliant, we're driving on. But if it's not there, we're saying, okay, Gavin, you need to stop doing A, B and C and start
cut
saving.
Back on your expenses a little bit.
That's it. And look, we still have a lot of landlords, unfortunately, that are taking their rental payments in cash. Fine, no problem. But unfortunately, our customers aren't taking that out of the ATM at the exact same time every month. So that's a huge chunk of their proven repayment ability that we can't see or we can't assess. So it's things like that. There's old rules like no gambling. The answer is yes to that, but like the odd flutter, no problem.
As long as it doesn't go through a direct debit or something.
Well, that it's not very regular. So sometimes we can see B365 or, Bet365 or Paddy Power a lot. And that's the conversation where you're going, okay, that actually needs to stop and come back in 6 months' time.
Take it out of the ATM. And
that's well, interestingly, I had a case not so long ago, and I don't know if you'll be listening to this, but obviously we had a lot of those gambling habits on the statements. And next thing we saw, transactions going to his friend on a weekly basis on his Revolut account.
He's borrowing money and stuff.
Well, that's it. So look, I suppose, as I say, you're presenting the best version of yourself to the lender. And they do get under the hood, you know what I mean? Like they really do. I mean, they will query anything over €500 that is out of course. So it's, get it right for 6 months preceding.
And in terms of, a couple of bank accounts, a lot of people have a Revolut as a kind of separate standalone, but they'll go through that kind of thing well.
So any banking that is evident. And as I say, our new Irish, we call them, if we can see money transferring back to the home country, we're looking for that bank statement as well. And often we're looking for a credit report in the home country as well to make sure that there's no outstanding lending. So there's very little you can hide, to be totally honest, unless it doesn't exist in any bank statement that you've provided to us in that 6 months, because literally it is very forensic. We're going down line by line on your bank statements, and if we see money going out, we're checking your other bank statements to see can we find it in there, and if we can't, we're asking the question, where did it go? And that sounds very extreme, but I suppose we have to ensure that when we submit your application that the underwriter is looking at you and saying, they're a sure bet of paying back the mortgage repayment. So some lenders are still stress testing, a lot aren't now, but some lenders are still stress testing by 2%, so that can bring an interest rate nearly up to 6%. So look, the rule of thumb is for every 100,000 you're borrowing, you have to be showing at least €550 in proven repayment ability every month for the last 6 months. But you can get it right, you know what I mean? And we're good at coaching to get it right. Sometimes our customers can fall off the road to success, but we're good at coaching and keeping them close. After that, it's finding the property, but no one will entertain you. There isn't an auctioneer in the country that will entertain you unless you have mortgage approval. Yeah.
And tell me this, in terms of, so we've talked about the first-time buyer there who's going and buying, and they're going up to 90%, but somebody that's thinking about buying a property for investment purposes. Tell us the process there. Is it similar, or because I know it's 30% is the deposit, but what about in terms of the ability to repay? Because obviously the property will generate a rental income. Does that come into it?
Yeah, it's actually solely on, whilst there is a financial assessment or credit assessment done on the borrower, it's actually the property is what the lenders are I suppose, interested in. And it's a tough calculator to pass, right? Okay, so it's a maximum of 70% loan to value, and the rent is scaled back. So you're passing a hard calculator to start with, right? So some lenders are assessing you at 70% of the rental income. Some lenders are assessing at 50% of the rental income.
So you have to be able to pay your mortgage if you're only collecting 50% of the rent.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
Exactly.
Okay. So it's a double, it's 2x basically your interest cover.
And some lenders are stress testing their interest rates, right, okay, on top of that stress of the monthly rental income. So it's tough. It is absolutely tough. I suppose the banks, back when we talk about the boom bust area, they probably got hit hard with investment properties. They were the first properties that,
people let go.
You know what I mean? So they did get burnt. So their lending criteria is definitely stricter on an investment property. So what we're seeing, I suppose, on the ground is that this is now with high rents being attained in the Irish market at the moment, we're seeing that their appetite will want a property in a large town or a large city. They're not interested in an investment property in a rural town. They want to make sure
be easy to move on. Yeah.
Exactly. Their appetite for one-bedroom apartments is low. They'll want at least two bedrooms. It's a better asset, I suppose, to sell, if anything.
Easier to shift.
Exactly. But the first assessment to pass is on the rental income, and that, I suppose, the application process is that we are assessing the property, and an independent valuer goes out to visit that property and confirm the attainable rent on it. So there's massaging the figures, really, you know what I mean by that. So it needs to be sound. But like I say to everyone, there could be a time when you will not get 6 months of rental income. So you need to make sure that you have a bank of rent sitting there to service the mortgage repayment. But it is a max of 70%. We probably find it, the best application is a 50-60% loan to value, if I have to be honest. And that's a good chunk of money. You know what I mean?
Huge,
it's a good chunk of cash, really, you know what I mean? The other thing that they've very little appetite for, and we're seeing a lot of this at the moment, is that we have young people that are trying to get on the property ladder, on the investment portfolio ladder, that don't have a private dwelling house but are trying to buy an investment property as their first property. Banks have very little interest in that also. They'll want you to have a private dwelling house and that your second property then become an investment property. The good news is that banks are lending. That's the good news.
Yeah, it's a difficult enough thing though, because as I was saying to you just before we started recording, I've heard a lot of people sort of, they go for the private dwelling, but the idea is they're just trying to get over that hurdle of having to have so much cash up front. And of course the problem with that is then when the banks go to stress testing you on your next loan, they'll identify that, well, hold on a second, this property is, they'll start,
shortfall in it.
Exactly. Start picking holes in it.
Yeah, but there is, so ICS mortgages, so their interest rates are quite high at the moment. You know what I mean? You're talking 7.2%. It's not a cheap interest rate, but they have appetite for investment properties if they fit the criteria. Right. So as a portfolio builds, they'll allow you to release equity from an investment property to purchase the next one. Right. So you can pretty much bankroll if you have enough equity. But to start out, you need a very low loan to value so that you're retaining equity.
So you're adding value to the property, creating equity, and then you can pull that out. Exactly. And so that's what we call the B or strategy. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that ICS are doing that all right. The only thing, I suppose, the bit of risk that goes with that is that you're going to have cross-secured properties. And so the security on the first property is tied into the second. Is that not the case?
Yes, it is. Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't know. Yeah, it is.
If one falls, you could end up with the whole lot falling.
Absolutely. So, like, what we're starting to see is that we have, maybe an unencumbered property that they're trying to release equity on to buy the next one, and that's risky. You know what I mean? Now, like, because you now have
you own it outright, and now you're tying it into a second property.
Well, you're handing over your title deeds. You know what I mean? Probably for a 30% or a 40% loan to value. So it is risky, to be sure. But it serves a purpose, I suppose, is the other thing.
It depends, I suppose, it's down to the cash flow and the opportunity. Some of the clients that I work with are they're looking at the HMO model, and that seems to be producing quite decent returns in terms of somebody that would be getting 2,000 a month from a property might be able to get 4 or 5, which is obviously great. It's more hands-on, and there's more wear and tear and stuff like that. But at least they're able to. But I've noticed that the property, the valuation of the property still comes in.
It does
at a problem because it's not reflected in their income.
Absolutely, and when a lender is looking at a HMO property, they're not going to look at it as a HMO. They're going to look at it as a unit that can be rented.
Yes,
you know what I mean, like a 5-bedroom property, regardless if it's rented separately or not. So they're going to be cautious on the rental income they're going to generate.
Again, it comes down to stress testing, really, isn't it? It's okay. So you're able to do well as a HMO, but in the worst case scenario, it goes back to a standard format. And I guess people have to be prepared for that because regulation could come in and suddenly you're told, right, this has to go back to a standard property.
Absolutely. And we've seen that. You know what I mean? We saw that with bedsits. You know what I mean? So, like, straight away there was a timeline put on those properties and they were no longer viable. So but definitely there is appetite for HMOs because there's such a, I suppose, low supply of investment properties. You can nearly charge what you want these days. If the rent cap was removed, maybe.
Well, it's funny because not everybody. It's funny about the rent caps and stuff because if you're going through the standard letting procedure, then of course you have to do that. But some people are looking at licensing, which is more like a bed and breakfast. And so Mags, what do you see as the challenges at the moment for people that are coming in speaking to you? I mean, the 6 months. If somebody they identify a property and they say, I'd like to go and buy this, but they haven't spoken to you before now, the likelihood is they're just not going to qualify because their 6 months is not.
Well, it depends. You know what I mean? Like,
on their level of income,
the dream client actually is someone that is paying the 2,300 euros per rent. When you hear that and you're like, is it going out of your bank account? And they say yes, and you're like, no problem. You're going to sail through a mortgage application. You know, it is the person actually that are maybe starting out, you know, with their, let's say, their new partner. She's renting a room, he's renting a room, and one is in cash, and it's a bit messy. That's the problem. You know what I mean? It's the couple, as I say, the dream purchaser is the one that's paying the high rent because automatically they've ticked the biggest
So
credit assessment.
you've proven that for the last number of years you've been stably
Absolutely.
paying your rent.
The problem then, Gavin, with that customer is that they don't have the deposit, right? Okay, because they're putting every euro they have into the rent. So that customer is being herded, and I use that word all the time to describe it, towards the new bills because they don't have the 10% deposit plus their fees for the second-hand property. So whilst the affordability would be better to buy in a second-hand property market, they're herded for the deposit. So that's something I've been, right or wrong, I'm not too sure, because one person will say if you put it onto the Help to Buy scheme onto the second-hand properties, you're only increasing prices. But the problem is that we have thousands of customers that do not have their deposit. Don't have the deposit. And we now know that the average age of a first-time buyer is 35.
Average age?
Yeah, is 35. And if you look at that, I have this written down here somewhere, if you look back 10 years ago, that 25 to 40-year-olds were 60% of the market, and they're now down to 17% of the market. So we're losing a generation, to be quite honest. And
that's people living at home probably to a degree, isn't it?
Jesus, 100%. And they can't get onto the property ladder. So whilst there is incentives there for first-time buyers, it's not suiting all, but I suppose the biggest challenge our customers have is that it's a stressful journey, and it can get stressful very, very quickly. So they come to us, we get them approved, and we let them into the open to find the property, and they're not there. They're not there, and they get burnt out. You know what I mean? And
disappointed. You bid on something, and then you have another. Sort of you're just underbidding.
Absolutely. So it's very, very challenging. And I suppose the advice we're giving to customers that are looking to buy a previously owned property is that they become best friends with the selling agents in their area, and I mean nearly to the point that they're ringing them once a week, wondering what did you value this week, because trying to get ahead,
get the foot in the door.
To get ahead of the 100 people that's going to follow them to that property once the for sale sign goes up. For the first time buyer, again, being prepared and being knowledgeable of what's happening in the community that you want to buy in. So is there planning permission approved? Is there developers looking at ground? You know what I mean? So that you're ahead of it the whole time.
You have your ear to the ground, basically.
Absolutely. And get educated. You know what I mean? Like, you can become an expert in anything fairly lively. But get educated on what's happening and where you want to buy. The mortgage part, as stressful as it is actually the easiest part.
It's easy. In terms of an application, so let's say somebody's done all the coaching and they've got their 6 months. From the moment when somebody says, we found the one, how long does the process take till you actually think you can have the money ready to go?
Depending. So if it's new build, you're probably buying off plans in today's climate. So you're waiting for the house to be built, right? Okay, so that'll take as long as the developer gets it done. So that could be 12 to 18 months. A second-hand property, I'd had this discussion with a solicitor during the week saying, what is going on in the Irish market? Because the conveyancing process has gone so slow. We have clients that went sale agreed last November and they still haven't got it. Wow. Still haven't.
November, wow.
Yeah, ridiculous. Yeah. Like in all my years doing mortgages, I've never seen it so slow. And there's a number of factors. Land registry is backlogged with the last number of years. They can't just get on top of it. We have conveyancing that is still on written document. You know what I mean? There is no digitalisation at all of the conveyancing process. So everything together has nearly brewed the perfect storm, and we volume.
But you've also got people that are trying to clear their property, and the person that's living in it can't find somewhere to move. And so it's like you're basically asking someone to become homeless unless they move out. Yeah, absolutely.
And like with the stress that we see, that the person because there is a few hours in that day of handover that you actually are homeless because you've left your rental property and you're taking the keys of your own. So and it always happens on a Friday. I don't know why, but sales always just close on a Friday. And I don't know if that's a legal thing. I don't know. We're always messing with solicitors, and it's always the solicitor's fault. We blame the solicitor. But again, it is stressful. So if you're buying in a chain, you need to really have your ducks in a row. You know what I mean? Yes. Obviously, if you're selling your own and buying another one, the person you're probably buying from is doing the exact same thing. So it can be cumbersome. So there's
a lot of points of failure potentially. Yeah,
absolutely. So when we're talking to a customer that is buying in that chain, we're always looking for the closing date of solicitors because that drives everything. You know what I mean? So we're letting the lender know, we're making sure we've all our completions documents in thing. And remember, as a broker, we don't get paid until the mortgage draws down, so we want it drawn down fairly lively. But it's really gone slow at the moment.
And in terms of somebody discussing that chain thing there, if you're trying to sell, so bridging finance or something of that nature, does that come into it? Do you?
Not available. Was available back when we talked boom bust, but was available in the boom. There is a lender that is looking at a bridging product coming out. They're looking at it with a while. We were expecting to have it launched earlier in the year. It hasn't come to fruition. I'm hoping that it still does, because it's a product that's badly needed in the property market. So just, I suppose, to explain what a bridging product is, just in case someone doesn't know what it is that you're selling your own property, but you don't want to sell it because you want to ensure that you get the keys to the other one. So you get a loan in the interim, and then when you sell your own property, you pay off the loan. It's an expensive form of finance. Well, it used to be anyway.
Well, you're covering two mortgages at the same time,
you
essentially.
And it's a little bit going back to the proven repayment ability. I have no doubt when that bridging product will come out, you'll have to prove that you can carry the two debts at the one time as well. So there's a bit of preparation involved in that. But it is absolutely a product that's required, especially for customers where we're seeing the bridging product is badly needed, is that I'm living in my home and I want to build on the site next door.
Right.
But trying to get the two mortgages together might be a problem. You know what I mean by that? So, or if I'm moving county, so there's a huge requirement for a bridging product in Ireland at the moment.
It's interesting, just the amount of stuff that's required, and yet there's nobody out there servicing the product. It's interesting. It's like everyone's so focused on the low-hanging fruit that they're not sort of looking at the stuff that requires a bit of an extra stretch.
They're looking at first-time buyers, Gavin. Like that's where banks are gone. You'll see it with the lowest interest rates in the market are all aimed at first-time buyers.
And is that because of the grant?
There's a couple of things. That green energy rate that we see all the time, that's the bank doing their CSR. You know what I mean? They're ticking a box for somewhere up the line. And it's great. Cheapest interest rate in the market is 3.45 now.
3.45 compared to 7.2 you mentioned earlier.
On an investment property. Now that's ICS. There is cheaper interest rates than that available from the main lenders, are in around 5.5%, 6% depending on loan to value. But they're all aiming towards that B3 rated property, which is predominantly new build. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. It's funny you say that, because we've built some houses in Shankill and I moved into one of them, and it's an A1 rated house. And I can remember just looking at the different options out there and stuff like that, and it's a good deal cheaper.
It is,
because of the rating.
And they're better houses. Have no doubt about it. They're definitely a better house. Sometimes we'd have a client that's buying a house and they're a D or an E. You know what I mean? And they're like, "Am I making a mistake?" And you're like, "Well, look."
The thing is, there's a bit of a trade there, because I moved from Blackrock. The A94 air code, which I saw was the most expensive in the country or something.
And you're like, did I make a mistake?
I was living there, which is really convenient in terms of getting in and out of town. Like, it only took a few minutes in the morning when it was early. I'm about, I'd say, 6 or 7 kilometres further out now. And so there's more traffic in the morning, things like that. But I've moved out to a nice, A-rated home. Yeah. The house I was in, I would say, was a D-rated. It was kind of an 80s kind of thing. Yeah. And the bills to heat it in winter were horrendous. I can remember we had the gas bill would be coming in and it'd just be on all day just to try to keep the heat in the place. Now I think I'm probably paying around 1/3 of what I was for the same property size.
And I'm sure at times you're kind of saying this house is too hot.
It's true. In summer certainly it is.
And there is a bit of a trade-off, because what we're seeing is that the newer build properties now are smaller. You know what I mean?
Smaller, further out a lot of the time.
Absolutely. You're moving outside the urban boundary the whole time. The garden is smaller. Everything about it is that bit smaller. So there is a bit of a trade-off. But I suppose it's what I'd like to say here is that if you are buying an older property and it requires works to bring it up to a good energy rating, the banks will actually lend on that also as part of your mortgage journey. So you can borrow at the same time to bring your property up if it increases the overall value of the property.
Yes.
Which it will do.
And it will. And you can also get those grants and stuff as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, because the banks...
Yes,
you won't get the grants until the works are done. So what often we do for a case like that is that we'd put the larger proportion of the mortgage on a fixed interest rate, and we'd leave the works part of it on a variable interest rate, so that when the grant comes in, they can pay it off.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, Mags, what about the market? We were just chatting before we started recording, and you were saying about, we're all sort of eating out of the same food bowl essentially when it comes to property. What are some of thoughts of yours, just from your perspective, where what we could do to kind of try to alleviate the housing crisis?
I think number one, our targets for housing is too low. You know what I mean?
34,000, like we should be doing 50 or 60, yeah.
At least. I would say we probably have a gap of over 100 and maybe even 200,000. I think Davy Stockbrokers came out during the week with 212,500
is the gap. It doesn't surprise me, because if you consider, like, we've been doing sort of 25 to 30,000 for the X number of years, and they were always saying that we needed 50. Yeah. So for all those years that we were 25,000 short, that's just accumulated.
Absolutely.
And so we're probably at 200,000.
And, you know, with the best of respect to the government, they come out and they give us a target, and we hit the target, and everyone is clapping each other on the back. The targets are too low. You know what I mean by that?
Well, the target is achievable. That's the problem.
That's the problem.
Yeah, it's like, instead of saying, okay, we're going 200,000 this year, and then they hit 35.
That's it. So there's no urgency. You know what I mean? There's no sense of urgency to get this done. And going back to we all eating out of the same food bowl, I firmly believe that, like, there was a time when our local authorities were building our social housing. That stopped for some reason. Someone along the way decided that it was better to go through the private development sector. And look, I'm sure there was reasons for that to make sense. I'm not too sure it makes sense now. You know what I mean? We have limited developers in Ireland. You know what I mean? The large developer, like, you could count in two hands the large developers servicing all of Ireland. And now they're servicing 50% of everything they build is affordable or social. So there lies a problem, really, in my view. And look, I'm no property expert, I'm a mortgage expert, but I think there lies, there has to be a problem in that. And I think from a planning perspective also, we're kind of getting it wrong. You know what I mean? We're building that 3-bed semi-detached. That doesn't suit the lifestyle or the life cycle of the customer. You know what I mean? So we all know we have an ageing population, but I don't think we're servicing that ageing population. Yeah,
although if you're trying to go after the first time buyer, then probably it is the right product, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. But, like, because of how will I say this? Because we have such pent up demand, that cohort of customer have now become the biggest purchaser. But we have all these older generation people that can't find anything. They're living in 5-bedroomed detached properties and nowhere to downsize to. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because that is exactly the problem. My mother is, she's living in the house that I grew up in, and it's a 5-bedroom house, and with a bit of garden, you know, quite a nice big garden, and she has been looking for a bungalow to move in because her hips and all this kind of stuff, and she's worried about stairs and things. And they don't make bungalows anymore. Bungalows are not a product that is sold. And so she had to go and buy something built in the 80s, and now she's going to try to upgrade it and stuff. So, of course, I'm involved in that process, and it is definitely a problem. And they're all bidding on these bungalows because they're all trying to do the same thing, basically, to downsize.
Yeah. And, like, you know, if you look at our census information, there's probably more 60-year-olds in the country now than there is 25-year-olds. You know what I mean? So if we don't get a handle on that, or if the government or the developers don't get a handle on that, me and you are in trouble. You know what I mean by that? And our children certainly are in trouble. And the other thing that I think could alleviate, so if we could get that right, it will free up the larger, older properties that now become the first time buyer properties or the mover property. You know what I mean by that?
Well, the thing is most of the properties that are these older ones that, you know, kind of elderly people are moving out of, most of those get developed into, you know, one house gets turned into 5 smaller houses. Yeah. And that frees it up. But they have to find somewhere to move that's local, because they do not want to move. Like in speaking from my mother's point of view, she, you know, the only option that she could sort of still be within walking distance of the areas she's been living for the last 40 years, and that was it. And she didn't want to go and start getting buses and all this kind of stuff. You know, you want to stay where you're familiar.
Absolutely, it's your community. You know what I mean? Why should you? You know what I mean? So from a town planning perspective, that's really important. You know what I mean? And now that we're pushing the boundary out, we're pushing properties out, that's not being thought of at all. You know what I mean? We're thinking of creches, we're thinking of playgrounds, but we're not thinking of what happens when these people reach 60, 70, 80.
The form factor as well, just like the fact that people are now building 3-story houses and stuff like that. In fact, there's houses near to where my mum is living, and they actually built 4-story houses.
There you go.
And
they're building up.
they're building straight up,
Yeah.
and then they have, like, they're quite narrow, obviously, but they managed to get an extra one or two of these houses into the site. You know?
There you go. The other thing I think would maybe alleviate some little bit of pressure is that we have forgotten that we are a rural Ireland, you know what I mean? And I come from a rural background. I come from County Cork. And good luck with trying to get planning.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm married to a farmer. We went for planning and got declined. This is a number of years ago now. This is back in 2005. But it made no sense why we got declined, you know. But anyway,
even though you're locals.
Well, he's farming on the land, you know what I mean. Now, you know, his dad was still alive. You know, we needed somewhere to live. You know, but it was funny because we could have gone back the road 2 fields and built in that field, but we couldn't build in the field, you know, so little things like that. Yes. So look, there's nuances around rural planning, we know this for sure. So, you know, re-looking at those policies that maybe you don't have to be born and bred in the town to build a house in the town. Farming communities aren't what they were anymore. There is farmers looking to sell land. You know, I definitely feel that's definitely a pocket of property that could be looked at to increase supply. Other than that, I just think, as I say, we need to treat it as with urgency. You know what I mean? We have an absolute huge problem. We're exporting our young people like there is no tomorrow.
It's funny you say that, though, because I was looking at the figures recently, and I can see that something like 140,000 people came into the country last year. Now, obviously, about 70,000 of those were refugees and stuff like that, but at least 40,000 of them were people that were coming here for work.
Yeah.
So there's people leaving and there's people coming in at the same time.
Yeah.
But they're not all the same. Yeah, it's different age cohorts as well.
And I see this in our own family. You know, my husband has older nieces and nephews, and not joking, I'm going to say 30% of them now are abroad. You know what I mean? They're finished their college. We have educated them to the 10th degree, and we've shipped them off to Australia predominantly still, even though that's now becoming a harder place to find employment. So they're going to start coming back. And yet we have... And the main reason, like, and I give this my nephew's story on this, he's been trying to buy a house in our locality for the last number of years and nothing has come up. You know what I mean? Because it's a small rural town. So they're not
building stuff in the area.
No, there's no building. There's like zero building. So you're waiting for a mover to happen. And that's not happening either. So it's become a real bottleneck. And it's no wonder then our first time buyer is age 35, and it's no wonder that our children population is decreasing, that the average family is now 2, you know what I mean? So there's a knock-on effect to all of it. And what the biggest thing is that we're in Ireland, or an island of foreign direct investment. So we now have employers trying to buy property so that they can actually fill their...
Well, we've seen Ryanair there recently enough bought the entire estate out and Swords and stuff. And I'm seeing that more and more. In fact, I heard somebody I know runs a hotel, and he said that at least 20% of their rooms were actually filled with their own staff that they could not get accommodation for.
Yeah, there you go. I know one particular hotel group that have been buying properties up around their hotel, and it is for staff. You know what I mean? And, you know, these are lower paid staff, you know, so like they have to, you know, they're not going to be paying the 2,400 euros per month in rental outgoings. So, you know, we have a budget coming up.
It's going to be a giveaway, I wonder.
I'm not too sure it's going to be a giveaway in property, but certainly I think, you know, heading in with a target for 2025 of a meagre 36,000.
It is. It's low. It's not a stretch goal.
No, it's not at all. Yeah. Well, is it achievable? Yeah. You'd hope so. You'd actually hope it's achievable because it's badly wanting. But to be quite honest, I think the government needs to take a step back and say, do we look at new ways of building properties? Is there faster ways of building properties?
Prefabrication, things like that. So, Mags, we were just talking about, if in the event of trying to build more properties, I mean, we have as I've been saying to a lot of people, one of the issues is just construction capacity just isn't there. And already we have an industry that is flat out. I mean, I can tell you try to get anything done now, it's delays and delay and delay. Because the guys just don't have the labour. And so if you wanted to go and increase it, we would have to do something really dramatic. And I was thinking about back when Qatar won the World Cup, and I moved to Qatar soon after, pretty much within 6 months of that announcement, I moved to Qatar for a period of time, and I thought this was going to be this bonanza, and so I moved down there, and I can remember them talking about they had to build all these football stadiums, and they were saying, but what are we going to do with this small country after all the football is over, like, what are we going to do with all these football stadiums? And then they were talking about building tens of thousands of apartments and hotels and stuff to accommodate all the hundreds of thousands of people that were going to come for the World Cup. And they say, but then what are we going to do after that? Because we're going to be stuck. So what they did was just bring in tons of big, huge cruise ships. And the cruise ships sat off the coast and people would come in and out every day. And that was a way of obviously you know, and so I was talking with my own sort of clients that we have a little mastermind with. And we were talking about, you know, that could be some sort of a solution where you bring in thousands of labourers and they just sit floating off the coast at Dunleary or something like that.
And build.
And every day they come in and they go off to sites and they do it. And then when all of that is done, the more houses that you build, the more of those that can actually be permanently accommodated. But at the moment, we just can't get over that kind of...
But I wonder, is it labour is our problem? You know what I mean? And I know that there is a shortage of labour, for sure.
Yes.
But... you know, our population has grown by 1.4 million. It's, you know, it's documented.
Yes.
There has to be more labour there. You know.
Well, there's also the thing is funny because I looked at this. I've been kind of studying this for a while, trying to get my head around it because I agree with you, and I say, well, how is the population growing and yet we don't have the labour? If you look back to the 1990s when the boom, sort of the Celtic Tiger boom, what happened was there was a move from the agricultural sector into the construction sector. People that were working as farm labourers found it was much more lucrative to be construction labour. Same kind of hard work involved, but it was more money in your hand. So they all trained up, tooled up for that. And then when the crash happened, a lot of people either went abroad to live or they decided to tool up again. And so they got jobs in tech companies and stuff, or they went back to university. So I know electricians that went back and did an electrical engineering degree because they had a couple of years of unemployment likely ahead of them. So why not just get the degree now that I can kind of have the time?
And we haven't been incentivizing young people to take a trade. You know what I mean? Like I remember when I was doing my Leaving Cert, definitely 30% did a trade, not that was, and it was the done thing, and it
was quite normal.
It was normal, whereas it's not now. You know what I mean?
Well, the thing is you can sit at a desk and have like it's funny. I was speaking to somebody who just got a job recently in Meta, and they were saying like that you sit at the desk, air conditioned, you've got free food, you know, in a little canteen just down the corridor, and you sit there all day, and you go off and you have your little breaks for 15 minutes and all this. And you could do that, or you could work at a building site and you're hauling like block work and stuff like that in the winter when it's pissing rain outside. So you can kind of wonder, like, you know.
But still, like, I mean, we immigrated a cohort of people to the UK to build the UK. We immigrated to America to build America. We have immigrants coming into Ireland, you know what I mean? And we're preventing them in lots of cases from working. You know, so like, do we change our tack on that a little bit and allow these people to...
We definitely need some fresh thinking for sure, you know, and it's just to get a little bit creative instead of the way it is at the moment where it's kind of like old protective kind of, you know, industry protection and things like that. Well, let's not do it any different. It's the same with the legal system. You were talking about the fact that everything is still done on paper. You try to bring in like the blockchain or something like that to record all these things. You can imagine the uproar you'd have in the law society.
You would absolutely, for sure. I had a solicitor's pack that came down in PDF and he wouldn't accept it by email. And I'm like, so what do you want me to do? Actually print it off and put it in the post? And he was like, yeah.
That's like, ridiculous, isn't it?
Really? You know? So we definitely... You know,
the planning system's the same, by the way.
It is.
I was speaking to my architect who's doing the project for my mother's house, and he was explaining that you have to print it all off and you have to go and you have to stand at the counter and hand it in and like put your fee in. Whereas it could just be click button. And then he was saying he was doing a project that was a heritage site. And because it was heritage, he had to do 10 copies of every single drawing. And all that is, you would think that a single email with the few PDFs, they could go and print it 10 times. Ridiculous.
Yeah, well, it makes no sense. You know what I mean? It absolutely makes no sense. So, like, if you've those little bottlenecks, how many more do we have? You know what I mean? And I do think it needs someone to come in and re-look at every whole step involved.
Like a housing SAR or something like that.
100%, completely independent of the government, you know what I mean, completely independent of the developers, because it's broken. We're proving that our system is broken, and it's broken from the day the developer buys the land, to putting in the planning, to getting the finance, like we talked about, larger developers, where they get their money from. Our Irish retail institutes should be more responsible for lending into the property market also,
very true.
at a reasonable interest rate. That's
reasonable. What's reasonable now?
Oh, well, I don't know.
Tell me this, actually, that's a good point, Mags. Where do we see interest rates going in the next 12, 18 months, in your opinion?
If you had asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have told you we just seen a reduction in the ECB, and then the markets in the US took a knock, so now they're stabilised again. September will be very interesting. Inflation is nearly where they expect it to be. We've always been aiming for this goal of 2% inflation across Europe. It's about 2.4, 2.6 given any given month. Will we see a 0.25% reduction in September? I actually hope so. I think we need it. I think the Irish market needs it. We're no longer the cheapest in Europe. You know what I mean? We're well behind at this stage. So the Irish banks probably do need to relook at interest rates to some point again. Yes. The average interest rate in June was 4.3 versus 3.7 in Europe. So we're well ahead.
Wow, we're way ahead.
Yeah, we're well ahead. Do I see interest rates coming down overall? All things being equal, the answer is yes. The Eurobar that would predict lending rates for lending institutions to buy their money is predicting in the next year and a half 2.95. So we're heading there, you know what I mean?
2.95.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you like to see 3% again for residential properties? You absolutely would.
I was talking to somebody based in the US, and he was saying over there, you can get like a 30-year mortgage fixed for like 2%. He got it during the COVID crisis. He fixed for 2%, 2.5% for 30 years.
Well, we have a provider in Ireland that offers a one mortgage, which is Avant Money. Now they're currently 3.8%, but they weren't 3.8% 5 years ago. So anyone that bought into that one mortgage 5 years ago are laughing. You know what I mean? Because they would probably have bought in at 2.4, 2.5%.
And that's just fixed for the entire
duration?
The
entire term. So if your term is 15, 20, 25, 30, they'll fix your interest rate. It's not a bad bet. Maybe not when interest rates are really high, but as the market stabilises to a more normal interest rate.
What's that company?
Avant Mortgages.
Avant.
Yeah.
Jeez, I hadn't heard of that. That's interesting, because anytime somebody talks about America, like, that's America for you.
Yeah, no, it's a great product. We'd have, let's say, switcher movers that have a reasonably low mortgage left but have no intention of putting a lump sum in the near future of the term. That's a really good product to be on. You know what I mean? At least you know what's coming. And they also allow customers to overpay on their mortgage principal by 10% per annum. Okay. So it's a good chunk.
Short it down.
Yeah, it's a good chunk. So it's fairly flexible. But interest rates, as I say, 0.25, please God, in September. Will we see another one before the year end? People are predicting that we will. I'd be thinking that we will also.
Which will in turn, and this is the sad reality, push up property prices.
Well, what you'd hope is actually you'd see the second-hand properties coming to market a little bit more, because people are sitting on properties that are on a reasonably low interest rate, and they're saying, Jesus, if we move off our 2.5 now, we're going to be paying 3.8 or 3.6%. Why? That's an extra cost that we don't want. Yeah, so if interest rates come down, it might encourage those people to move. Will it? Look, I honestly believe property prices are going to keep continuing until we get
until we get that 200,000 that you're talking about.
Absolutely, it's going nowhere. You know what I mean? So, and as I said in the outset, the borrowing power of our customers isn't necessarily the problem. You know what I mean? We have the Help to Buy scheme that has a ceiling of 500,000. That's now too low. It's not servicing, certainly not the Dublin market. I think it's under review. We'll probably see an announcement of that being increased in the upcoming budget. But as I say, I'd love to see that personally being available to the mover market as well, because I think it will help people to just get onto that second-hand property. But it's a difficult market for those starting out. I pity them. You know what I mean? It is like, as I say, people come to us saying, oh Jesus, the mortgage process, it's the easiest part of the journey, unfortunately. It's finding the property is the hard one.
Mags, it's been an hour, so I'll start winding it up now. There's a few things I'd like to ask. First of all, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self if you were starting out again?
I'd buy early. That would be my advice. Get in early, because whilst people be saying to me, "Oh God, is the property price going to burst?" It's going to burst. We're definitely going to burst. If you look at property prices to where they were back in the boom bust,
yes,
we're ahead. You know what I mean? So it comes in cycles, and you have to think, if you're buying property, you have to think in 10-year cycles. That's my 2 pence worth.
I think you're absolutely right. And the other thing I would say is people are kind of going, "Oh, we're now more expensive than we were at the last boom." And I'm saying, yeah, but that's 17 years
exactly
ago.
And we have to kind of move it away as well a little bit and move on from it.
But I mean, it's 17 years of, if it had just continued to go up and up and up, you'd be already above that.
Absolutely. Like, I'd love my kids to be property owners before they ever intend to get married. You know what I mean? That they have a property, so that they're starting with something. That would be my hope. So, but they're young now. But so that would be my thing. There's no right time to buy a property. That's, we have people saying, "Oh, I'll wait until next year. The interest rates might come down." There's no right time. You know what I mean? Interest rates might come down by 0.25%. We know property prices have gone up by 8%.
Yeah, so exactly. There's always corresponding kind of responses.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're looking at buying a house, you buy today.
Mm-hmm. Mags, tell us, how can we find more about you and your business if we want to reach out to you? Yeah,
you can log on to our website, which is www.mortgagenavigators.ie, or I'm all over LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, yes, that's how we connected, yes.
So we're easily findable, and we'd love to talk to you. We'd love to help you on your mortgage journey, be it a first-time buyer, mover, investor, as I say, or switcher, or buying that lovely holiday home down by the beach. We can service that as well.
One in Spain.
Well, actually, we can't do that one. So it has to be on the shores of Ireland.
Okay. I'm glad you clarified. Mags, it's been great to meet you and to speak with you, and look forward to watching your business grow.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right, guys, I hope you found that interview interesting and useful. And if you're in the process of applying for a mortgage or looking for that process to begin in the near future, definitely go and reach out to Mags. And very, very nice lady. And I found her, I noticed that she was on the Irish Times about something, and I reached out on LinkedIn, and straight away back onto me. So very approachable, nice lady, and hope you found this one useful. Do send her some business, and I think it'll probably be a good two-way bit of business interest for you guys. So mutually beneficial, let's just say. So guys, I hope you're having a great summer, and I will see you next week.